They say it was a great country of unlimited possibilities. They say it won World War II solely by itself. They say we should come to it back and live in peace and brotherhood there ever after, under Moscow's control, of course. Good afternoon. This is Henry Keane on UATV in a daily wrap-up explaining complex things in simple terms. USSR. It was a geopolitical entity formed on the ruins of the Russian Empire. After the October coup of 1917, the Bolsheviks over 4 years annexed the territories of independent Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Turkestan. In the summer 1922, the leadership of the Russian Communist Party decided to formalize relations between the republics in the form of a state union with center in Russia. 100 years ago, on December 30th, 1922, in Moscow, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was born. Having existed for almost 70 years, the Soviet Empire then began to crumble and disintegrate into independent states. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine and Belarus declared in Belovezhska Pusha that the Union was no longer a subject of international law. And on December 26th, one of the two chambers of Supreme Council of the USSR adopted the declaration, and the termination of itself, the Soviet Union ceased to be.
The Soviet of the Republics of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, following the will of the Supreme State Organization of the Republics regarding the creation of the Commonwealth of the Independent States, stipulates that with the creation of Commonwealth of the Independent States, the Union of SSSR ceases to exist as a state and as a subject of international law. Declaration on the Association of the creation of the Commonwealth of the Independent States.
That's it, folks. In less than a minute, you listened to the story of the rise and fall of the empire that was once occupying a sixth part of the whole earth. Whatever USSR was for the outer world, an economic partner, a military partner during World War II, or the main antagonist after it, for us, the nations in the Union, the Soviet Empire was nothing but a prison, holding its borders solely by the force of arms. Today, Ukrainian, and not only Ukrainian, all ex-Soviet nations, historians rightly consider the decades in the Union as an annexation. I mean, what else can you call the times when everything Ukrainian was simply destroyed? The Great Famine of Holodomor and the nationalization of all the peasants' property in 1921-23, then another Holodomor of 32-33, which dozens of countries have already recognized as the genocide of the Ukrainian nation. And at the same time, the Soviet government, represented by the Russians, began to annihilate the Ukrainian intelligentsia. We, in Ukraine, even have a specific term to define the terror of that time: renaissance of executions. It seems to me that the world knows little about it only because the Second World War waged later on, which, of course, had way more terrible consequences for the world. Let us not forget another Soviet deed, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, a treaty by which fascist Germany and the Soviet Union agreed upon not attacking each other. It was signed on August 23, 1939, and already on September 1st, Germany attacked Poland, and within 2 weeks, Soviet troops crossed the Polish border. Perhaps that very treaty was the reason for the Second World War to wage on and for Germany to occupy Poland, France, the Czech Republic and all Europe in a blink of Hitler's eye. While the USSR occupied the Baltic states, is it surprisingly that today Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia and Poland are amongst our biggest friends in Europe? Is it really a surprise for those to remember well enough the humiliating burden of the Soviet military boot on their backs to understand it perfectly clear? Russia will not stop on annexing Ukraine. Moscow wants to expand its influence and territories back to the USSR scale, no less.
Latvia consistently emphasized that the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must be restored within international recognized borders, and only Ukraine has the right to decide when, where and under what condition Russian aggression can be considered stopped. Latvia rejects any pressure on Ukraine on this issue, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia in an interview with Delphi.
I mean, how naive and colonially self-assured should have you been, Mr. Putin, to start this war? I mean, what did you expect? For Ukraine to greet the invading wooden army with flowers? Well, our army and Zaluzhny await you here, our artillery and air defense on the battlefield, Zelensky and Arestovich on the political front line, and us, the Ukrainian media, in the realm of the public opinion. And we are going to fuck you till you love us, Mr. Putin. You believe that Ukraine belongs to you, but our people, our politicians, our army, our nation has decided otherwise. And so it will be. You, Mr. Putin, are running a country big in size, but not in capabilities. Those of our audience who still might have doubts on that should sit in a car and take a drive only 100 kilometers away from Moscow or any other major city in Russia to witness with their own eyes the devastation, unrestrained drunkenness, poverty, and the absolute absence of a future. These are the eternal components of the Russian realm. You really expected the Ukrainian nation, Mr. Putin, to welcome your morbid delusional desire to make everything you see Russian? In 25 years of your usurper reign, Russia didn't manage to create even its own car that meets international standards. Russia buys German and Japanese cars. Russia buys it all. Laundry machines, clothes, smartphones, TVs, computers, social media. Well, just take a look around in your bunker, Mr. Putin. Is there anything made in Russia? No. All the missiles and rounds, the means of war and destructions, are produced in your version of Russia these days. You had enough oil throughout this quarter-to-century-long reign of yours to get you trillions of dollars. But what have you created for your country, Mr. Putin? You are spending them at war, while only yesterday's launch of 69 rockets could have improved the life of one small city in Russia, creating a better future for Russian people. But you simply can't create the future. You are all about the past, Mr. Putin. And since you are not capable of buying any future for all of your oil trillions, this is why you invaded Ukraine. It is an attempt for you, Mr. Putin, to steal our future. You want to grow, not in technology or philosophy or a national idea, no, just in size. Since 1991, the Russians continued to create their puppet countries of Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Crimea, and Donbass. Belarus is almost completely economically and politically dependent on Russia. And I somehow have the impression that Mr. Lukashenko just loves it. Putin's colonial attitude and imperial plans did not go anywhere. Back in 2020, Vyacheslav Nikonov, chairman of the Committee on Education and Science of the State Duma of Russia, said on the air of one of the Russian TV channels that the territory of Kazakhstan was a great gift from Russia and the USSR to Kazakhstan. Seriously? So, like, Kazakhstan never existed before the USSR annexed it? Well, what about the Roman Empire then? Was it a great gift to Rome from the USSR and Russia and Putin's grandfather just as well? I have no doubt that Putin's historians will soon find proof of that. Russian propaganda began a new attack on Ukraine's international image. The Kremlin-influenced media has it that our government has started persecuting Christians and believers. What's the best disguise for an antichrist? Exactly, calling an antichrist someone else. Let me explain that complex religious dogma in simple terms for you. All the mass has nothing to do with faith. The Kremlin is just struggling to keep its influence on Ukraine through the church. In the early 1990s, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was a part of the Russian Orthodox Church, but then decided to separate. Moscow certainly did not like it then. For more than 30 years, Moscow has been trying to impose its perception of the world among believers through priests who obey Russian religious mafia boss with a KGB university graduation, just by the way, Patriarch Kirill, whose really name is Mr. Gundyaev. Today in Ukraine, we are fighting all of the Russian influence, including that religious one, and we are winning. Our church is independent now. Putin has lost, and answers unto his another defeat as he always does, with another wave of lies, propaganda, and conspiracy theories. That's it. That's the whole story.
Our society after February 24th will demand justice. If you hide your affiliation to the Moscow Patriarchate, your connection with people who is in churches in Russia pray for our soldiers to be killed, bless them for killings, then how can you look in the eye? If you have no relation, officially disown, say that it is a Satan, Putin and Kirill, call a spade, and then it will be fair. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security of Defense Council of Ukraine, on the air of the National Teleton.
We're not only not fighting against anything Christian, being almost all of the nation Christians ourselves, but Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and atheists of all sorts coexisting in Ukraine, making up what Ukraine really is, a multicultural canvas of nations and beliefs united under the umbrella of freedom. Yes, we will be fighting all of the Russian influence, including a faith-disguised one, after all, during the war. We just can't afford people who obey Moscow. Never Ukraine was against any faith, but the faith of its submission to Russia.
It is possible and necessary to ban a religious organization whose leading centers are located in the aggressor country. It can be not only the ROK, but also other religious organization. It cannot be said that this is unconstitutional or violates human rights, because the European Court of Human Rights actually uses the doctrine of democracy that is able to defend itself. The philosophy of restricting human rights to freedom of conscience in this case is such that, yes, this is a fundamental right, there is a freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, but it can be limited if necessary to protect national security.
Ukraine simply will not tolerate collaborators, no matter in Kazakhs or civilian. Ukraine will not tolerate priests helping Russian troops to hide in churches. Ukraine will not tolerate traitors in disguise of believers. Anyone is free to pray on his knees in Ukraine, and no one will put Ukraine on its knees. In this last episode of Daily Wrap-Up of 2022, I would like to resume some of our achievements. Every year, in the President's New Year's speech, there is the phrase, "This year was tough." But it seems to me that these words sound like a perfectly appropriate description of 2022 for us. A year ago, no one could have thought that next year we will meet in trenches, far from our homes, in the bomb shelters, and many of us, civilians or military war correspondents, unfortunately, are not meeting it at all. Why? For the sake of the ill whims of a handful of people in the Kremlin? Ukrainians never choose war. Despite all the difficulties, Ukraine withstood the Russian invasion and is successfully fighting back. This year not only can be and must be called the year of war and Ukrainian bravery in it. We will not surrender to any imposed fate, to any larger and, at first glance, stronger adversary. We will not only endure, but will return everything that we lost. And then we will thrive. In 2022, Ukraine also gained a number of significant victories over Russia on the diplomatic front. This includes securing global coalition in support of Ukraine, isolating Russia, imposing stiff international sanctions towards the aggressor, and having received military and other assistance from over 50 states. In September, Ukraine created the Kyiv Security Compact, which outlined ways to guarantee Ukraine's security in an efficient and reliable manner up until it joins NATO. The document was produced by a group of experts led by head of the President's Office Andriy Yermak and former NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Currently, Ukraine is working on the creation of a new world security system and the creation of a special tribunal for those who have violated international law in any way possible.
створення трибуналу.
I am sure that the tribunal will work. The international compensation mechanism that we are currently building will also work. At the same time, we must cooperate as much as possible with our international partners, with the International Criminal Court. No crime committed by the occupiers in Ukraine should go unpunished.
Ukraine has proven its role as a reliable food security guarantor committed to all of its international obligations. Ukraine has asserted the Black Sea Grain Initiative together with the United Nations and Turkey, despite Russia's countless attempts to ruin it. In November, President Zelensky launched the Grain from Ukraine initiative to stop Russia's Hunger Games. More than 14 million tons of food have already been shipped to the most vulnerable countries. At the same time, we are not only trying to establish ties with the collective West. Ukraine announced its visionary course of deepening cooperation and enhanced partnership with the countries of the Global South. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has accomplished the first ever diplomatic tour of African countries and was invited to take part in an ASEAN summit for the first time in history. This marks the beginning of an era of new horizons in Ukraine's cooperation with countries of Southeast Asia and Africa.
We began to understand much better the nuances of African politics, the situation and opportunities for Ukraine in Africa. Secondly, the views of our African colleagues on a number of issues were changing literally before our eyes. Because Russian propaganda worked and is working quite powerfully in Africa, we will strangle them everywhere, on every continent and in every corner of the world. We will make every effort not to leave them with oxygen literally nowhere.
We understand it clearly. Many more challenges await us in 2023. The most important thing, however, is to win the war. To defeat Russia, the more military and humanitarian support we receive from our partners worldwide, the sooner this war will be won by the world that desperately needs it. The Kremlin will do its best, and it will use all opportunities to bring instability and prolong the war tactically, even if losing it strategically. Russia has already started a disinformation campaigns to influence the presidential elections in Turkey. There will be more fakes, of course, like, for example, that Ukraine is misusing the provided weaponry. Damn right. In the Russian eyes, finally watching incoming HIMARSes, and this is a very big misuse. Russians can't imagine that a tyrant and dictator Putin can and must be opposed. To avoid his legal mobilization, they just flee instead of ending his usurped illegal reign. We are not like that. Ukraine will never surrender. We will go through our war for independence and freedom with dignity, success, and will remain determined to win it until we do win. And then we see each other, dear world, on UATV channel to explain complex things in simple terms, directly from free and victorious Ukraine. Stay safe, happy, and tuned in 2023.